Good afternoon from Old Dominion University in Virginia on the East Coast of the United States. I am Dr. Brian Porter, Associate Dean of the Graduate School and Professor of Psychology at Old Dominion University. On behalf of my colleagues, welcome to the panel on getting into research and graduate school. Our goal is to provide information and answer as many questions as possible about preparing for a graduate program. From what to do through to a successful application for, entry into, and completion of a graduate degree. This is an ambitious goal for 1 hour, we know, but we'll get you started. And our conversation today will help prepare you for continuing to ask questions of your teachers and professors as you progress towards graduate school. So we ask you to use the chat option to let us know what you want to know. These questions will be collated and sent to me to ask the panelists. I've also prepared questions in case you need time to think about what to ask, but know that you take priority. We want to answer questions you pose about graduate school. As an in-depth description of each panelist's background is provided on the program's website, we'll just provide brief introductions here in the next few moments so you get to know who we are, and then we'll dive into the session. And I'd like Dr. Bays perhaps to begin.
All right, thank you, Brian. Craig Bays, Associate Dean of the College of Sciences and Professor of Chemistry. Just a little background on myself, I guess, is I grew up in the mountains of Virginia from a blue-collar family, had an early interest in science as a child. When I got to high school, I got a chance to work in a lab at a local college, which that experience was very important to my decision to follow the career to be a faculty member. I did have, of course, I had to take out a lot of loans to get there from the economic background I was from. So much of what I try to do in my lab, in addition to doing research, is to help students find experiences that will develop themselves as young scientists. Mentoring, or helping them get connected with research in other labs. Some of that's informal, some of it's through funding. I have a research experiences for undergraduate site for community college students interested in chemistry. And this largely matches the goal of the College of Sciences, which is to get students involved in research early and start path toward that STEM career.
Thanks, Dr. Bays. Dr. Chappell?
Hi, I'm Drew Chappell. I'm an associate professor and associate chair in the Department of Ocean, Earth, and Atmospheric Sciences at ODU. My research information, I think, is on the website, but I also wanted to share what got me there. So my undergraduate degree is in biology. My graduate degree is in chemical oceanography. I started out as a young child of a scientist, very interested in the sciences, and found ways to do summer science programs and other things and get into research as soon as I could. But I also took time in between undergraduate, my undergraduate degree and graduate school, to explore other options before going on into grad school. So I'm happy to answer questions along those lines as well. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Chappell. And sorry I mispronounced your name. Dr. Chang?
Hello, my name is Raymond Chang. I'm an associate professor of mathematics. I got all of my degrees from the University of Virginia. I've been the graduate program director for my department for several years. And unlike most professors, I spent half of my professional career in private industry. Happy to answer your questions.
Great. Thank you very much. Dr. Dobbs.
Hi, good afternoon, folks. My name is Fred Dobbs. I am the chair of the Department of Ocean, Earth, and Atmospheric Sciences. I've been here at Old Dominion University since 1993. I'm a biological oceanographer, and my specialty is microorganisms in the ocean. I'm interested in viruses and bacteria and even some of the larger forms that we call eukaryotes. Recently, I've become interested in plastics in the ocean. And in fact, I will be giving a talk about that on the 7th of August as part of the REYES program. My time to professorship had some interesting interruptions. I worked for a couple of years for industry, and taking my savings from that, I spent a year as a visiting scientist in Denmark. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Jayantha, did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm Dr. Sampat. I'm an assistant professor of computer science here at Old Dominion University. I joined Old Dominion University back in 2018, so I'm here about 2 years now. Before that, I was an assistant professor at Cal Poly Pomona for 2 years. I got my PhD from Texas A&M University College Station. I'm originally from Sri Lanka, so I came here, did my master's degree at Texas State University, close to Austin, Texas. And then moved to College Station, huge school, a lot of football. And then I moved across to California and then back again on the East Coast, in Virginia. So my area of research, I study eye tracking, I study brain using EEG. And we do a lot of techniques like machine learning, information retrieval, and we do things related to human-computer interaction. So these are some of the work that I do, but from the application point of view, I do research in autism spectrum disorder and also ADHD, looking at these population and try to understand sort of indexing how we can come up with eye movement measures that we can use it from gamification, providing sort of assessment tools and things like that. Happy to answer any questions that you have. Thanks.
Very good, thank you. And as for myself, I earned my bachelor's degree at Virginia Tech and my master's and PhD degrees in experimental psychology at the University of Memphis. As a psychology professor, I've been here at Old Dominion since 1996. And my specialty is working on public health interventions to reduce injuries, fatalities on our roadways due to traffic crashes. So you can actually call me a traffic psychologist if you want to do that. And for those interested, I will be giving a talk later in July on traffic psychology overall. So again, on behalf of all my colleagues, welcome. We want to jump right into questions. And just to get started, Craig Bays, could you maybe give some really good reasons to earn a graduate degree and why we should take extra time and money to do so?
Well, I'd say that the two reasons I think that would be important for deciding to go to grad school would be one, if you really love the subject. So if you really have a passion for which chemistry or physics or psychology, and you really want to make a difference in the field or drive new discoveries, you really need the depth of knowledge that a graduate degree will give you in order to do that. Another reason that you might try to or want to go to grad school would be is if you have a career goal that would require that degree. For example, if you want to teach in college at a college level, you're going to need a graduate degree. Probably most likely now a PhD is generally expected for teaching at the college level. It will take some extra time. I would say for a PhD, probably somewhere between 4 to 6 years is what you might expect. And the money, and you're essentially postponing the you're delaying gratification by taking that choice, because it will take some extra time. You won't earn as much money necessarily during that time, but once you get your degree, it opens up a lot higher paying job opportunities for you. The money, of course, is going to depend upon the subject and the career path that you choose. One of the benefits, and we'll probably touch on this later, is that even though it will take you extra time to go to grad school, in many of the STEM fields, you can be paid for going to school. So unlike undergrads where you've got to pay your tuition, you might have a scholarship. In many, if not, well, most STEM fields, depending upon the degree that you're seeking, you can get paid for being there, either through doing teaching, serving as a teaching assistant, or by performing research for a faculty member. And generally those assistantships, you're going to see that your tuition is waived. So you're not necessarily going to be spending as much money as you would as an undergraduate. You're going to be earning some, and eventually when you finish, you're going to have the opportunity for a lot of higher paying jobs.
Okay, thank you. Hey, Dr. Chappell, maybe as kind of jumping in on that, maybe what were some of the reasons you sought? Why was a graduate degree so important for you and what you were trying to do? Maybe share that as well.
Yeah, so most of the good reasons for going to grad school, I think Craig Bays just covered pretty well. For me, I knew pretty early on that I really loved research, and I had the benefit of having someone who was a professor in my family, and as well as someone who was in business. And the professor, even though he was working a lot, always seemed happy, and the person in business did not always seem super happy with what they were doing. And so when I realized that I had a passion for research, I looked on websites. I sought out all sorts of information I could on how could I do what I wanted to do, and almost every path led through grad school. And even though I took time off just to make sure in between undergrad and grad school, in the end, I found one of the things I was doing was writing about people's research, and I was really jealous at everyone who was doing research. And I decided that that was my sign that I needed to go on to an advanced degree, because if I wanted to do the work myself, I needed to have at least a master's. And then again, I didn't have to pay for my education, and in fact got a stipend in that process. So for the work that I was doing in graduate school. So it doesn't necessarily cost you to be in graduate school, at least in the sciences, depending on what your advanced degree goal is. But it can lead to the career path that you want. And so the question to ask yourself as you're moving along is, what is it that you want to be when you grow up? And my graduate advisor regularly asked me that question, just to make sure that I was doing what I needed to do to reach the goals that I had.
Very good. I think a lot of us actually do what we do not to grow up so fast, to stay involved in research, ask questions, and be around great students who keep us all young. So that's fantastic. We've started to have some questions come in, and I want to, Dr. Dobbs, this one I want you to handle, if you would, for me. Morgan from Moseley, Virginia asks us, how would you suggest getting into research as an undergraduate? We cannot hear you, Fred, if you could.
I see what happened. Okay. New to WebEx now. Now you can hear me, yes? Yeah, okay. I did a double click. I now understand. Morgan, thank you for your question. Professors are always looking for smart and hardworking undergraduates. We want them in our laboratories because not only do we need a new set of hands to help with everything from dishwashing to field work, but we also are taking a strong look at you. If you've got the smarts, if you can write, if you know your math, we want you as a graduate student. So it's a great opportunity for you to learn more about the lab and the professors and the graduate students, and for us at the same time to be getting some help. The way to do it, I think, is to knock on doors. I think you'll have the best success if you prepare for your professor's door knocking. If you read a couple papers, find out what she is doing, find out what his research interests are, and make sure they're sitting down if you tell them that you've read one of their research papers, because they may fall over with delight. So knock on their doors, ask them if you can help in the lab. Volunteers are welcome, but you should try first to see if you can get some student pay while you're doing this as well. Thank you.
And Dr. Chang, Morgan had a follow-up too to that as a piggyback. Maybe you can help address how work that can begin, excuse me, as an undergrad may be able to continue into a graduate program. Maybe some experiences you have had with that.
Yes, absolutely. Very often, actually, that's what a master's degree will do for a student in our program. We'll give them a master's project that enables them to go into the research horizon, or the horizon of knowledge, and then that gives them a running start when they begin their PhD research. Undergraduates can do this as well. It's as simple as Dr. Dobbs said, knock on a door, talk to a professor what is doing in their research, and if there's some common interest, ask I can get involved.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Jayantha, I think this is a good question you can address. It comes from Melissa in Ottawa. She asks, do we need to have a research project or thesis idea for graduate studies? So maybe a piggyback off Dr. Chang's question, but in the students you work with, do you expect them to have an idea when they enter graduate school?
So not necessarily, especially for graduate school, you don't need to have a certain topic in mind. I mean, if you have something, that's good, but what happened is that we specialized in, I mean, it depends on what you want to do. If you're thinking about a PhD program, or if you're thinking about a master's degree, a thesis option, maybe having a topic probably going to be helpful for a master's degree. But for a PhD program, I expect a certain area that I'm going to be working on, that my students to sort of working on. Maybe a sub part of the work probably going to be helpful, having an idea that we want to do. But I should be able to help you very early on. That's the expectation as a PhD advisor. I should be able to help you early on, then you are kind of taking on and getting into sort of the detail. But for a master's degree, having a topic probably going to be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, this is a good question from Tess from Puerto Rico, and it's one that I'll actually address. And then if any of my colleagues want to add to it, I'll let you do so, certainly. I asked the question, excuse me, is what kind of scholarships are available now? Now could be currently or in the future as you're planning. And Dr. Bays mentioned this a little bit about current research. There are different types of financial support that can be offered to students, everything from assistantships for often doctoral students. Some master's students will get assistantships that will require a research position, if you will, or a teaching position in the classroom or laboratory. Sometimes those do come with tuition waivers where your tuition is paid for as well as that assistantship. There are, of course, scholarships that students sometimes earn. Some of our colleges here at ODU have different scholarship amounts that can be given to students that can be given independent of whether they're on assistantships and so on. And then, of course, there's the financial aid option that students may pursue as well. I guess the point is that there are many different avenues to find funding for graduate programs. What we encourage students to do, of course, is you're working with those degree programs that you're applying to, you're working with those professors. Each of the programs, and some of us on this panel have served as such, have graduate program directors with whom that you will work about different options for funding your education. And then as a member of the graduate school, I'm also involved with working with the colleges too, to assist them on finding funding opportunities for students. So there's a myriad of different opportunities to find funding for graduate education. That alone could probably be a 3-hour workshop or forum. But just know that there are opportunities out there that could help offset the cost to your education at the graduate level. Okay. I want to move to Brett's question. And Dr. Bays, I want to bring you back into this. Brett from Richmond, Virginia actually asks, can you complete a master's or PhD in the sciences while working at a job you have a bachelor's degree in?
Yeah, I think you can. I think largely it will depend upon the field that you're in and the flexibility that you have with your job. I would say that computer science might be one of the easier ones or easier fields to do part-time graduate work in. Often because once you get, it's the graduate programs are often very different than what you see at the undergraduate level because you're not taking as many classes. So you might take classes the first year, maybe the first year and a half, but once you finish that, then you really want to be in the lab and do research. So you have to be able to carve out the time and be able to balance, your work versus getting into the lab to get the research that you need to do in order to complete your thesis or your dissertation. So it might take you a little bit longer, but I think if you get the right advisor and you have the right flexibility with your work, I think you can make it work. And we have seen some students make it work. It's just a little bit more common for students to be full-time in most of the STEM fields, I'd say.
Thank you, Craig. Dr. Chang, you've actually been singled out by one of our questioners. We actually have a couple of questions, one from Madeline and one from Melissa, I believe it's, no, Elisa, I'm sorry. Madeline is from Augusta, Georgia. Elisa is from Ottawa. They both ask about academia versus industry. And so I'm kind of combining both of their questions if I can. What would the main differences between working in industry versus that in academia? And then just kind of piggyback on that, if you would, Dr. Chang, about the pros and cons of waiting to go to grad school a couple of years. Maybe you stay in industry, and then you go to grad school a couple of years after you finish the undergrad degree. So it's the industry academia question and the delay of entry into grad school, if you would handle.
Sure. The differences between academia and industry, I think, are pretty huge. When I was in industry, I had to make decisions that were extremely weighty, meaning 6 or 7 figures might be on the line in a single decision, or someone's job might be at stake, or an entire contract involving dozens or hundreds of jobs could be at stake. And while that may not be typical, that is in contrast to my academic job, in which if I make a mistake, a student will simply raise her hand or his hand and say, "Oh, professor, you messed up over there," and then I'll just correct it. And so that is one of the main differences. Another difference is that when I was in industry and it was 5 o'clock, most people went home. And while I might still think about my job, there wouldn't be as many opportunities to actually get stuff done. Now that I'm a mathematician, I can be lying on the beach with my eyes closed and be working furiously. And because I can do math in my head. And so it sometimes will be there when I don't want it to be there. There are advantages and disadvantages to that. Let me have Dr. Davies contribute to this as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chang. Certainly, I did not spend as much time as you did, but I was working for industry while finishing my master's degree and then stayed there. It was just a total of 2 years. I'd been studying as a marine ecologist in graduate school, and I was hired by a company that was doing exactly that same sort of work. So I continued going out on boats and taking samples and working with microscopes in the laboratory and running computer programs. So it was really an extension of what I was doing, but as you mentioned, Dr. Chang, with much less flexibility. Yeah, you had 2 weeks of vacation, and you couldn't work on the think with your eyes closed, thinking on the beach. I love that, working furiously, so it was very, very different. I then took my ill-gotten gains from industry and used that to support myself for a year as a gentleman scientist in Denmark. It was only then that I came back to the United States and began my PhD program. It certainly gives me a perspective that most professors don't have, and I think that's a useful one. Thank you.
With regard to taking time off between undergrad and graduate school, I think that's more of a personal decision. I myself went straight to graduate school. The idea being that I could then do my graduate coursework while the undergraduate work. Another is that I was still single and I didn't have responsibilities to take care of a family. And so that was another advantage to getting it done, getting my graduate work done early. But other people might have other considerations, other priorities.
Yeah, thank you both. I'm happy the questions keep coming in, and I appreciate it very much. Dr. Chappell, I wonder if you could take this one next for us. We have a student who asked, this is Luke from Ireland, who asked if it's a bad idea to jump from undergrad straight to a PhD without a physics. Now, Luke asked specifically about physics, but I think the question could apply to really any of our STEM degrees. Is it a bad idea to jump straight from undergrad to go straight to PhD, or should a master's be done along the way, or does it depend? What would your advice be?
I think it definitely depends on the student and the program. So some programs won't let you in without either having a master's degree or having work experience as a research technician or something. So they won't necessarily let you right in to a PhD program. I jumped right in. I skipped a master's. I went just into PhD, but I had taken time off. And for me, I was pretty sure that what I wanted was a PhD. And I didn't want to sort of stop along the way, especially since I had taken time off already. Well, not time off, but I had taken time in something other than graduate work. And so it's definitely, that's a personal decision. And it also depends on your program as to whether or not you can do that. Most graduate programs, particularly PhD programs, you have to be very self-directed. And so if you're not as sure about what you want to study, or you aren't as focused in terms of being able to be self-directive of your time and with good time management skills towards your research, you get a lot more hand-holding in a master's program generally. And so if you're unsure that, or you want to test something out, you can start in a master's program. In some cases, you can switch either from a PhD to a master's or from a master's to a PhD. But these are all questions that once you've started to think about the places that the programs that you're interested in, the people you're interested in working with, it's the best policy would be to ask the faculty that you're interested in working with, or ask people associated with that program, or ask the graduate students, actually, if you can communicate with a faculty member and have them connect you to the grad students in a program you're interested in. They're definitely they can tell you whether or not you need a master's to go through that program, or whether your undergraduate work would be enough to get you through.
Thank you very much. We're going to shift our attention now to a series of questions that have come in specifically from international students asking about work here in the US. To lead off, Dr. Jayantha, I was trying to find the question on my chat box as well as prime you for the question. Pablo from Mexico asked, if I live outside the United States, could I still have a chance to get a PhD at ODU? So if you could address that, how your program and maybe ODU at large, how we do that.
So if you still live outside, but the problem is that getting the admission to the school. That's going to be the biggest thing that you need to kind of worry about, because part of it, that's something that we had a discussion right now because of the COVID-19. We had some of the students who got admission. They had an issue getting the visa to come to the university. So can they take classes outside? Right now with the I-20, that's the document that give to students to come into the US. So you need to have that before you start taking courses. So without getting the without getting the visa, without getting the I-20, you have. I don't think right now there's any option that you can take classes at ODU. But there are some of the distance courses at this point. That sort of gives an option that you can take some of the classes, from another country. We have some of the students who are from India taking classes on our master's distance course. But we have a new data science course coming in. So there are options that you can take some of these classes online, and then whenever there's an option that you can now get the visa and you can come in and do it. But for a PhD, that's going to be different. There's something that you need to remember, that PhD need time. I mean, it depends on where you're going to be working on. Even for a computer science, you're going to think that computer science is that get a computer, you can do some work, from anywhere in the world. But you still need that close relationship with your advisor, especially for a PhD. Even if you are a student who are working full-time, maybe you're trying to do it part-time, you still need that close relationship early on with your advisor to figure out what is exactly that you want to focus on, what sort of research that you want to handle, what is the topic that you want to do, whether this is something narrow enough that you can focus, that you can spend your time doing your PhD. So I think you need to have close relationship. I don't think that having a distance relationship is going to help you, especially for a PhD. For a master's degree, I don't think it's not going to be a big problem. But for a PhD, I think distance probably not a suitable option.
Thank you. And of course, we are very well aware and watching the difficulty students are having currently to get visas for many reasons. And so, yes, again, working with the programs, working with your graduate program directors in our visa office as you get closer to those application processes, then we can certainly help, or any U.S. university could also guide you on some of that timing that he was mentioning as you prepare or try to begin a PhD program. So we certainly value students. We very much want you to come to Old Dominion University, and we're very committed to help you do so if we're the best fit for you. So yes, we are very mindful, and we do help students accomplish that shift when we can. So thank you very much for that question. And we have quite a few other questions about international study with this wonderful international audience. Okay, so panelists, I'm gonna open this up to anyone in the group. I love this question. It could be interesting to answer. Luke from Ireland, you ready? Here it goes. How does grad school in the United States compare to Europe? Anybody have experience with European models? Maybe to help, as my panelists think, I just sat on a dissertation committee for a Norwegian student She was actually a Brazilian student working in Norway, doing a dissertation in English on traffic psychology. This is how exciting and wonderful these international relationships are. And the dissertation process was somewhat similar to ours. It's still a research project, primary research project. In her case, she had to do 3 different studies and publish them. Some of the curriculum can be the same. I think some of the, my experience in Europe, maybe it may be maybe more open for general research over time than say more of a stricter curriculum that some U.S. programs have. But I think it may differ by discipline too, and also by country. So panelists, some of you have spent some time in Europe on leaves and Fulbrights. What were your experiences? Everyone wants to jump in at once.
Let me give you my perspective from the computer science. If you look at the European schools, especially for the graduate programs, PhD, the amount of time that probably you're going to be spending going to be less. Normal duration is about 3 years because you start with a research proposal, especially for computer science. You start with identifying a faculty or advisor with a research proposal. So that means that when you start, you have a clear picture of what you're going to be doing, and you're going to be spending on doing that, what you proposed on your research. So there's clear difference between the US and especially England, like UK, where you are taking less courses early on. But here, normal duration is about 5 years, means that you're spending at least 2 years taking some courses, sort of a supplementing your knowledge. And then you go into doing more and more research after that. So I think that's sort of the major difference. Probably that we're spending more time here getting background knowledge, but in England and other European countries, probably you're directly jump into the research. So there's pros and cons in both.
All right. Let's move on to another international question. And this one, I think, maybe just may just be good advice. And maybe, Dr. Bays, I'll take a first shot at this for me, if you would. Edgar from Mexico City and Samira from Uruguay have very similar questions about getting involved in research. So I'm going to begin with Edgar. If you could handle his question first. How could an international student get involved in research perhaps outside of their origin country? And Craig, I don't know if you have had that experience or not, but if not, what would you suggest Edgar do?
Does he mean that he wants to come to another country to do research, or stay in his home country and do research abroad?
I guess, reading between the lines, and Edgar, if I misinterpret your question, my apology. But I guess my assumption would be if someone is undergrad somewhere else and he or she wants to get involved outside of their country, that maybe interpret that broadly. A summer program, maybe, not just necessarily applying to a graduate program.
Yeah, I think that if it's a summer program or a summer experience or some limited experience that's not necessarily a graduate program, my recommendation would be talk to the faculty in their undergraduate program to see if they know of any collaborations internationally. I know of one of my collaborators at BCU has a strong connection with Brazil. He has a lot of students in Brazil to work in his lab, either as students, sometimes just on a temporary basis. So I think if it's just on a temporary basis and not graduate school, you'd want to find some advice from a local faculty member that might know of someone who is interested in hosting students over the summer. There are probably other programs that through the U.S. government or maybe even your home government that would provide some funds. For example, Fulbright. I think you could probably get some funds through a Fulbright to do something like this. If you mean come to the U.S. for grad school, the current situation set aside, I mean, for the most part, I would say most U.S. departments are more than willing to consider applications from international students for their graduate programs.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Jayantha, you said you could contribute too, if you would, please.
Yes. One thing that I want to mention right now, I have 6 undergraduate students from my home country doing research. So this is part of sort of a collaboration that I have one of my colleague back in Sri Lanka. So she always kind of assign 3 or 4 students every year for a certain project that these students work with me. So I normally give them a topic, and they work with me for a whole year. So it was neat. It was successful. We had about 4 or 5 publications done with these students. So what you need to do, find the faculty that you're interested in working, but don't discourage if they don't respond to you. But keep going, keep at it. Contact them and see whether you can volunteer, see whether you can do some work, a small part of the research in a distance basis, from your home country. Approach them, ask them, and you can read a couple of papers and show the interest, and maybe bring an idea that you can discuss. But it's a matter of finding this one person who's going to give you this chance. So I'd say keep contacting people, and don't discourage when faculty not going to respond to your emails, because I mean we get tons of emails, especially students asking admission questions. But I rarely get any emails students asking to do research. So that may be a good option for you to work in a sort of collaborative research. Good question.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, as we move towards the last part of our panel today, I want to shift towards the application process and things that we as programs are considering, because that's where a lot of the other questions are heading now. And Dr. Chappell, I'm going to give you the first one. And I'm sure you're going to love this. This is from Prataxin from India. What changes should we expect in applications to grad schools in STEM, given the current COVID situation in the United States for the next year or so?
That is a really good question. And I think the unfortunate answer is I'm not entirely sure we know the answer to that question right now. We have been, the most important thing that our departments are doing is to try and stay in communication with the international office. So if an international student is interested in applying to our program, we direct them to communicate with the international office to ensure that we're as up to date as possible with visa restrictions. In terms of non-international students applying to graduate schools, obviously some of the challenges some of the things that we look for in STEM fields is research experience. And at ODU, we've not been allowed to have undergraduates in our laboratory for some period of time. And I know colleagues around the country are having the same problem where they can have no one in their laboratory. And so there's a lot of remote research that's being done. So anything that's computer-based is encouraged. And so I think that it's, as a student looking to apply to graduate school in the next year or so, it's good to communicate with faculty to try and see if there are any options for doing research that they might be able to do remotely. So I have an incoming graduate student that wanted to ask, what's the best programming language for getting into bioinformatics? And, are there any resources of that this summer, while I can't be in the lab, I could look into learning? That made me super happy as a as a faculty member to have a student ask me that question. And I sought out as many resources as I could to point her in the right direction. And so, you know, as someone who's going to be looking at graduate applications in the next year, we're going to be seeing less people with research experience, because juniors and seniors who would otherwise have it are not going to have it necessarily. And so we obviously will be changing our metrics as well. But if an international student, the best thing to do would be to communicate with the international office of any school that you're looking into, or your own school.
And I can say, speaking from ODU's graduate school, I mean, we are still recruiting. We are still advocating for programs. We are still getting assistantships in play. We're working very hard with faculty in the Office of Research to restart research when it is safe to do so. We are trying to reopen labs, just like everyone in the United States is doing. I think Dr. Chappell's comment about the flexibility of research is important. And just know that we know as well that you are having different experiences currently. And so if you're looking for graduate programs in the next year or so, well, we're very well aware of what your challenges were, because we've had them, and we will have to look at applications accordingly. And I want to keep on that vein of thought about putting these applications together in the age of COVID or otherwise, maybe even particularly in the age of COVID. And Dr. Bates, why don't you take this one for me? Alicia from Virginia Beach basically says, aside from the undergrad research, which is important, we've said that a few times here, and a high GPA, she'd like to know what are key qualifications we look for in an application, particularly for PhD programs.
Well, I would say that in addition, the coursework that you have, so you do want to have as the highest GPA as possible, although a high GPA is not necessarily required for admission to a graduate program. You want to have good grades within your subject, but in many cases, a few kind of lower than you'd like grades won't necessarily mean that you can't get admitted. The undergraduate research is important because one of the other key components that goes along with admission is a lot of programs like to see publications, and if you're active in research, then you're going to get publications, and that can be very helpful for getting admitted. Also with research, you're getting letters of recommendation. So you need, both for graduate school and for when you are going out into the world, you need someone who knows you well that can write you a good letter of recommendation. So if you just have a class and you ask the instructor might only know what you've performed in class. And if you've got a big class, the instructor might not know enough to write a really good, strong letter of recommendation for you. So you do want to get to know, you want to get a couple really good references through research or through other interactions outside of class. For the STEM fields, you also need to make sure that you are taking the appropriate amount of math. In most fields, in all fields, I'd say you've got to have some math background, whether it be chemistry or physics or even psychology. You want to have kept up with the math so that when you get into the program, you can do the statistics you need to do or do the programming that you need to do. So you kind of need to know what the basic skills are for that graduate program, whether it be computer programming or statistics or whatnot, so that you're ready to kind of hit the ground running when you start the program.
Thanks, Dr. Bays. Now, in the chat, I know if you're reading the chat to, I don't know if you can see what I can see for everyone chat. Dr. Dobbs and Dr. Jayantha also mentioned key points that, in the interest of time and to get to other questions, I'll just mention. Writing skills are very critical, making sure you hone up on writing skills, and a lot of the written work, scientific written work, is in English. Certainly in ODU, there are English requirements. So if English is something that you need additional work with, and that is something we also encourage. And we also have opportunities here as well to strengthen English skills. But writing and quantitative skills are important, and Dr. Bays mentioned those. And Dr. Jayantha also mentioned for industry experience for computer science PhD programs. So again, depending on the discipline that you're seeking, working with your graduate program directors, they may have additional advice for you about what other things are unique to that discipline to be reached. Yes.
Can I add one thing to that?
Absolutely.
So even if you feel like your skills are not where you might think they need to be for graduate school, I don't think that should prevent you from applying to programs, because we can always work with you on those skills. Writing skills are important, but I know personally for my students, I work with them very closely on getting their writing up to where I want it to be. So there's a lot of back and forth with your advisor on what are the holes in your experience, and how can we get those skills, get you those skills that you're going to need. So I wouldn't, even if you're maybe worried about some of these things, don't let it stop you from applying.
That's absolutely right. Thank you, Craig. That's absolutely right. We definitely want you to apply. And you're going to be, particularly at the PhD level, we have a mentorship model, and you're going to be working very closely with that supervisor, as he mentioned. One other question that's come in, and maybe Dr. Dobbs, I'll have you handle this one, about people who are maybe thinking about leaving their job to start a master's or PhD, and maybe the role of age in one's lifetime entering a graduate program, and what opportunities or challenges or impacts on funding, for example, could you offer advice for?
Well, certainly, without parameters, let me set my own. Many students go to school, and we're talking about going to graduate school at, let's say, ages 21 to 25. If you were considerably older than that, let me just add 20 years to that. If you were mid-career, in your 40s, I still think that it would be perfectly fine to make application and enter graduate school. Concomitant with age, however, you might have more family responsibilities. You might have a mortgage to pay on a house. And so this decision will be a very, very big one for you, perhaps financially, more so than if you were only 21 years old. And so I think it's all the more important there that you know what you're doing, that you reach out to potential advisors well in advance, understand what the economics will be as a graduate student. And so you have the most information possible to make a well-considered decision. I don't know if I would not recommend graduate school to anybody, because you become a scholar. And that's, for all of us, that's driving motivation. It's very exciting to learn so much about a specific subject. So maybe I'll just open it completely wide open, and anyone from 20 to 80 can go to graduate school. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Dobbs. Dr. Chang, here's one for you from, if I mispronounce the name, please forgive me. Vishnu from India wants to know, for pursuing a PhD, again, towards that process, should the research interest be specific to a particular topic, or can the application state in that desire to pursue a PhD that the student has an open mind? So in other words, how specific does their research plan or desires have to be in order to get into graduate school?
It doesn't have to be specific at all. And in fact, I suppose I should add, having undergraduate research is great, but it's not a requirement. It is absolutely not a requirement. If you go to an excellent undergraduate program, do well, most of all, learn something and apply, your application will demonstrate all those strengths. And if you choose to do research, choose something that's accessible to you at the time, and show that that you're curious and that you're creative and you're hardworking, and that's what your undergraduate research experience, if you choose it, will show. Most likely, a PhD research problem will be much higher level. It's going to require a lot more coursework, and it's not necessarily going to connect with your undergraduate research project. So don't expect that to happen. If it does, it's nice, but we shouldn't plan on it, and it's not expected to.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe a last question and that we can pass around to the panel in your particular disciplines. We had a general question come in. It had to do with engineering, but it could be any program. I know we're focusing on other disciplines here, but this is from Cody in Chesapeake. How long does it take to get a PhD? So why don't we go round robin? On average, folks, in your programs, how long does it take to get the PhD? Fred, you start.
All right. You can do it as fast as 4 years. Most of our students are taking 6 years.
Okay. And I know Dr. Chappell is in the same program that your experience as well. Okay. Dr. Jayantha, what about computer science?
So about 5 years average, and I expect around 5 to 6 years to finish your program. But I mean, again, this is not from Old Dominion University, but I'll give you a little bit a different view from Texas A&M and from my lab. When I finished, we had a student who finished after 12 years. So it's I mean, again, this is a full-time student working on, and she finished after 12 years. And there was another student who took 10 years to finish. I took 6 years, and I had my colleague finish in 5 years. So it depends on what are your motivations going to be. But here in Old Dominion University, we see the average around 5 to 6 years.
Okay, very good. Dr. Chang, math?
The average is about 5 years. I had a PhD student finish in 3, and I've known a few who finished after 7 or 8, but they still call them doctor. It's just fine.
That's right. You still get the credential. Absolutely. Dr. Bays, what about your program? Chemistry, biochemistry?
Probably 4 to 6. And a lot of this, if you're worried about the time that will take, it can be very dependent upon your project. Some projects, you'll have everything work just how you like it, and you can get out for much quicker. And sometimes you've got to really troubleshoot and spend a little bit more time than you would in order to get things to work. So between 4 and 6 is, I think, reasonable.
Okay, very good. And for my program in psychology, it's about 4 to 5 for an experimental type PhD. If you want to go into clinical psychology, you add a year on for the required internship for degree. And I actually think this is a good place to stop. I want to thank the panelists and all the participants. I believe we handled almost every single question that came our way, and actually left a few questions on the table that we simply did not have time to address. And so if I didn't get your question, participants, hopefully we will get answers to you. You know how to reach out to us. But I guess at this point, thank you very much for attending the session this afternoon. Panelists, colleagues, thank you very much for taking time. And I wish everybody a good afternoon and best wishes, and keep attending the REYES sessions. And thank you for joining us for this conference.